You need that undying optimism in the face of all the challenges to overcome the hurdles and build something great. One of the things I say, if you don't like politics, don't go work at a big company. But if you don't like work, don't go work at a startup.
Today, we're honored to have Scott Deetson join us, a four-time successful entrepreneur and tech leader who shaped enterprise software and storage. As former CEO of Pure Storage, Scott transformed it from a startup into a billion-dollar revenue giant with flash technology, taking the company to a successful IPO in 2015. Previously, he led Zimbra, acquired by Yahoo, and helped grow WebLogic at BEA Systems. Now, as CEO of Augment Code, he's building an AI coding assistant for professional engineers. Join us as we dive into Scott's journey, his drive, challenges, and lessons in leadership and innovation.
What does that mean for, I guess, recruitment market, right? The industry in general. Does AI, especially with a platform like Augment Code, does it replace software engineers? Is there going to be less software engineers in the market?
Well, so the hint, of course, is in the name.
Scott, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on the first ever episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. I'm looking forward to go throughout your career, discuss where you came from, WebLogic, Zimbra, Pure Storage, and where you are today at Augment. But just to start off, I want to read out a quote that you said quite a while back, but I'm really keen to get your thoughts on looking back today, how it reflects on you. So the quote goes, "If you aspire to lead people or an industry, undying contagious optimism is an essential asset. Cultivate it. Just try not to be blind and stupid."
I am equally thrilled to be here for the inaugural podcast. So great to join your listeners, and I'm sure this is part of many good things to come. So that particular quote comes out of, there was a debate happening in the Java community, and I had made a proposal that I thought would bring two sides together. I was challenged by the side I was disagreeing with and said, just why in the hell do you think that would ever work? And I said, I guess I'm just a blind, stupid optimist. And then one of my allies in the debate said, Deets, I sure hope you don't lose your optimism, because then you're just blind and stupid. But I really do believe in it. If you don't have an optimistic view, you have to be a realist. But if you don't have an optimistic view of where a new company, a startup can lead, you really can't pull together the team and inspire the team to go off and do and accomplish great things, because it's hard. And so you need that undying optimism in the face of all the challenges to overcome the hurdles and build something great.
One of the things I read about you is how you assess startups. And one of the things that you said is you like to go after big problems or big markets. So there is an element of having this huge optimism when you're going after something that maybe hasn't been done before or disrupting an industry.
Very much so. My rubric for evaluating startups, at least for my personal participation, is I do like big markets, because you want to change the world, right? If you're going to assemble an extraordinarily talented team, you want to attack some worthy problem. And ideally, this is also a market where there is significant pain. The customers may not even recognize the pain, but the pain needs to be there, and then you have to come up with an innovative solution that addresses that pain. Ideally, in conjunction with some sort of technology that's going to change the market. And so when you put those ingredients together, a sea change in technology, unhappy customers, a fantastic, brilliant team, and a big market, you can have great success.
We'll definitely get to that because there's quite a lot of grounds to cover. There's Pure Storage. I'd like to talk about where you are today with Augment. But I'd like to start from the beginning, where it all began, right? Your upbringing. I read also another blog by yourself around really focusing on your upbringing, especially your father. I'd love to start there. And I'd like, I think for most part, there's a lot to be taken away from where the inspiration comes from, where the hunger and the drive comes from. So going back to the beginning, where did it all begin?
So I was not a particularly great student in high school. I was a bit of a contrarian, and had a bit of fun, probably a little bit too much fun. But I was quite good at math and science and passionate about those. Um, and I was able to parlay that and some good test scores despite mediocre grades to get into Carnegie Mellon, which is my alma mater. Um, and I was sucked into computer science based on the quality of the faculty that was there. One example is Jeff Hinton was my intro to AI professor. Who went on to be considered the godfather of neural nets. Um, that kind of inspiration was, just drew me into the field uh, to the point that I thought I wanted to be a professor and do research. And it was coming out of undergrad, I had done very well. I thought I was a hot shot. Um, Getting into grad school though, and getting to work with my peers, I realized I was nowhere near as smart as the professors, certainly, and many of the grad students. Just the level of talent that was arrayed at a top tier university in computer science was extraordinary. And so at that point, I actually fell back on my dad. My dad was an entrepreneur. He had started multiple businesses. Never had a great success, but he didn't have technology going for him, and so he built businesses like a kitchen remodeling business, for example, and a medical filing business, and so he worked very hard hours. Um, didn't achieve the success, but I loved that the grades were real. One of the things that I worried about with academia was, it felt a little political to me. I watched work that I thought was very good, but wasn't sold particularly well because there wasn't a charismatic researcher behind it, get less love, especially in other universities, than work that might not have been as good but had was sold very well. And one of the things I love about entrepreneurship is, you know, you've got to deliver real value for customers to part with money. At least, they don't repeat the same mistake. They may give you money once, but if they're going to give you money multiple times, it's because you're delivering real value to them. So, I think I like the grading system. Um, and I figured if I'm going to work hard, because professors and researchers actually work really hard, if we're going to work really hard, I wanted to have a grading system that was more fun. And it just turned out to be a wonderful career choice. Uh, I think my particular ability is helping see market opportunities, and then connecting value, from the customer to the technology, and figuring out how to, find the winning plays there. I'm never the best technologist or best business person in anything I've done, but I've been a bridge between the two, and that's I think helped the teams I've been part of succeed.
That's incredible. And going back to Professor Jeff Hinton, um, tell me about him because you're right. He's now a hallmark of AI. When you think of AI, you think of him. He's the godfather of AI. Tell me about him. What can you tell me about Jeff?
So I had him when he was fresh out of grad school, postdoc, and early faculty member. And even in those days, there were um, the symbolic reasoning researchers at CMU, which were very strong, were naysayers against neural nets. I remember Herb Simon, who was a Nobel laureate, saying to Jeff, if you ever get one of these neural networks working, I'll go in and find the symbols for you because I know they're inside. Because intelligence must be based on symbolic reasoning and not on the neural network model. And the thing I admired about Jeff is he had the gumption, the wherewithal to stick to that research agenda for 30 years while the technology platform was catching up to him to the point that he could demonstrate how capable these systems ultimately were. And I ended up doing a PhD in machine learning, albeit not with neural nets, right? I was in the symbolic reasoning school that was, that Jeff was pushing back against and saying, look, even if, this isn't right, it's at least a very interesting um, area of research. And, his continuing to press on that for decades, I think he certainly earned his Nobel prize for that wherewithal. And just he's a great guy. Cares about students, cares about doing the right thing. And I like to think I was inspired by him all those years ago.
What impact do you think he has on today, and especially since ChatGPT came out a few years back? What impact does he play on the AI industry today?
So it's mostly through his students, and he is, very quick to pass credit, which is, again, part of his character. To give credit to the phenomenal students that he's had that have participated in all of the great work. Right, he's had students at DeepMind, students at OpenAI, students at Anthropic, and of course Google. And so you see the sort of tentacles of his reach touching many others. And I think he's a force for good in wanting AI to deliver value to humanity. Seeing real upside, but then also cautioning the industry about risks for this technology. And I think he's been pretty balanced overall.
I was going to leave Augment to the end, but I think it's a good segue to talk about Augment today, and the fact that you are the CEO of Augment Code. It's an AI company. Thinking about your early days with Professor Jeff Hinton and where you are today. Tell us about Augment. I'd love to know. I mean, I obviously know about Augment, but I'd love to hear from you. What is the problem statement that Augment is solving?
So, as large language models emerged, yeah, I've spent my career across startups doing really large, complicated software, and it turns out it's really hard work. Once you get a large, sophisticated code base, trying to evolve that is painful. It requires engineers maintaining a huge amount of detail in their minds, and a level of coordination as multiple people are making changes to that software, so that you get to the outcomes that you're hoping for. And large language models emerged um, 5 years ago, really saw the promise to handle some of that detailed work and alleviate some of the pressure on large scale software engineering. And that was the impetus that brought the Augment team together. We saw some of the early products in the space, and felt like they were targeting simple programming from scratch. I want to crank out a weekend project or build a website or something of that ilk. And there's no question that that's fun and rewarding work, and it makes sense to have products that targeted them. But we really wanted to go to the other end of the spectrum, to take enterprise software engineers that are looking after, large scale databases, networking platforms, security solutions, storage. How can we help these big complex code bases be evolved by elite teams of developers? And so we set out to tackle the context problem. How could we enable an AI to understand tens of millions of lines of existing software and to help evolve that software in the most productive way possible?
What does that mean for the, I guess, recruitment market, right? The industry in general. Does AI, especially with a platform like Augment Code, does it replace software engineers? Is there going to be less software engineers in the market?
Well, so the hint, of course, is in the name, that we are convinced that um, the need for human programmers is not going to be obviated by this generation of AI. If anything, I expect the world's going to hire more software engineers in the years ahead than we currently do. So, you know, AI can definitely handle more and more of the grunt work. AI can generate unit tests. They can crank out boilerplate code. Early class definitions. They can help you orchestrate a series of changes that need to come together to impact an overall feature that you want to add into the system. Um, but they don't have the long term vision of where that software needs to go. Understanding the user requirements, um, do I want this to be a cloud service or is it running locally? Should I use a microservices architecture or some other approach? What is the data model? Um, how can I better manage security and performance? These kinds of considerations are still very much inspired by human insight. And so it's this collaboration between human and AI that leads to much better outcomes, much less painful software development, as well as higher quality software out the other end. Um, and I think that combination, getting better quality software and getting it much more predictably and repeatably, is going to unleash a lot of new software demands. Almost every piece of software has a long list of feature requests and tech debt that people would like to fix. You know, um, the United States market alone loses $2.5 trillion in productivity per year due to software failures. Um, let's fix the software. Let's deliver the software of our dreams that has all of the capabilities we want and doesn't break and isn't insecure. Being able to close that gap, I think, is going to unleash a lot of software innovation that will create wealth and lead to whole new businesses.
So, Scott, you don't feel that with this new revolution of AI and how it's impacting different industries, where do you see AI being a positive, and where do you think it might be a negative?
AI, it turns out to be extremely good at detailed work. Managing really large amounts of detail. So, even before large language models, we saw the potential in the sciences. If you look at physics in the large or physics in the small, particle accelerators and astronomy, they generate just so much vast amounts of data that humans really can't parse it and come up with meaningful insights. I think we're seeing the same thing in molecular biology, right, with the success of AlphaFold and other similar models for being able to predict these complex biochemical interactions. So things like drug discovery and so on. I'm hugely bullish that AI is going to have a profound impact on medicine and health and so on. Um, I'm a much more of a bull on the AI case. I think the world benefits from having more intelligence, and it's a different kind of intelligence than human intelligence. But hopefully, it will allow us to advance many different disciplines. At the same time, I am cautious. I don't want to pass control to AIs. I think we need to be very careful about AIs perpetuating themselves, about, giving them a chance for one AI to write a new AI, and then not have human intervention in the mix. So much like Augment, I see the opportunity to supplement human intelligence with AI for the kinds of things humans aren't naturally as good at as the AIs. But that there's so many activities that are still very human centric, where the AIs are not good yet. AIs don't really understand the physical world. I don't believe there's anything close to an AI that is conscious today, and so there are tools that we can bring to bear to help you know be more productive at work, be more productive in our personal activities. Um, find better outcomes more easily. But, I don't see any near term threat as long as we continue to be careful.
Those are two areas that you mentioned. One being, for example, cancer and discovering perhaps maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but is it possible that AI can help cure cancer?
Very much so. I think the challenge when you want to be able, I mean, our bodies develop cancer. I think at least at my age, supposedly every week or two, some cancer is developing inside my body, but my immune system cleans it up. And so cancer is a regular occurrence, but your immune system takes care of it. It is only the cancers that are stealthful to your immune system that are able to evade immune system detection that turn out to be a problem. And so, the opportunity is if there are cancers developing that have that stealth, can we teach our immune systems to respond to them, or can we design, um, drugs that are specifically capable of attacking just that cancerous tissue, that has a different DNA sequence than the rest of the body. And so, we can do targeted medicine that goes after those particular cancers or, immune system enhancement. So I think AI is going to be critical to developing this, especially given how many different variants there are in these cancers. And so we need AI's capability at scale to manage all of that detail.
But what about the negatives of AI? What's the if there isn't a fail safe to stop AI, what where could AI truly be detrimental?
I think AI is going to be very disruptive to global economies, right? I think this will be, we will look back at this as one of the biggest, if likely the biggest disruption in history to date in terms of how economic value is created, and so I do believe it's going to lead to obsolescence of some jobs, and maybe a good analogy is, moving from an agricultural to an industrial economy, right? We used to have the majority of humanity working on farms, raising food. And then we, through industrial practices, we were able to, I think it's order 2 or 3% of humanity today that is actually involved in farming. So I think we're going to see certainly disruption like that, where certain jobs will, one of the classics is driving cars. I think we're going to see more and more robo taxis and so on, and people may choose to drive because they like to, but that there's an area that we may have to find new jobs out for people, but the optimist in me says if we are continuing to create ever more economic success and wealth, we will find so many new activities for humans to take on because that's always been our history. Humans are extremely adaptable, and there are so many different ways to employ human creativity that are underutilized. That I'm confident we are going to find plenty new things to do and give up a lot of tedious, mundane work and replace it with something that's more creative and more fun.
Going back to the beginning when you first started your career, did you start at IBM? Was that your first job in technology?
Actually, coming out of Carnegie Mellon, after I got my PhD, I joined a startup in Pittsburgh called Transarc that was focused on building large-scale distributed systems. And that startup eventually was acquired by IBM. So I stayed on for maybe 9 months as part of IBM, and then I did a year walkabout before deciding I wanted to test the Silicon Valley waters directly.
What did you do in that year between IBM and WebLogic?
By the way, my career has been, four startups followed by year-long sabbaticals at least. And so that first one, I did a walkabout. I grabbed a backpack and I went to Africa and Australia. I did some environmental work with tracking black rhinos in Africa. I went scuba diving, doing research on coral breeding, and then I was in the jungles of Indonesia, Borneo specifically, following orangutans and proboscis monkeys around. Um, and then I did following career steps. I did other similar trips. So I've had a chance to be on all 7 continents, and taken the opportunity to recharge the batteries, get perspective back. Usually, when I come out of a startup, I'm a bit tired of the technology game, and think I've often said I'm going to go be a marine biologist. But after a few months off, that I'm really excited to dig back in technology. And that first sabbatical, I was trekking in Thailand, and we got to the Myanmar border and crossed over into Myanmar, which you're not supposed to do. And I had a book on ATM networking that I was reading at the time because I was missing technology. So it always sucks me back.
So you came back. So WebLogic, is that in Silicon Valley or was it somewhere else?
No, I came to San Francisco specifically to join WebLogic. It was a connection made through a Wall Street colleague that I'd worked with while I was at the first startup, Transarc. And many of the ideas that Transarc was going after came to fruition in WebLogic. We had the internet, and we came up with this concept of an application server. At the time, most of the business logic was being deployed in client PCs, but on a non-secure environment like the internet, that didn't make sense. So we came up with this concept of a web application server to host business logic and connect into databases. And that business took off. In 5 years, we did $0 to $1 billion in revenue. As so many both online companies in the dot-com heyday, as well as a lot of bricks and mortar companies, all built their online presence using our technology.
With that revenue piece, you said $0 to $1 billion. How long did that take?
I think it was 5.5 years, basically from start to when we were able to, cross over that $1 billion threshold.
What is that transition, right? From that 0 to 1, you've got that product market fit. How do you know you've landed at product market fit?
So it was crystal clear for WebLogic. There was a show called Java One, which was, it was the equivalent. It was the top show of the day. Equivalent to what the cloud providers do today, where all the technologists feel they need to be there. And we got a booth on the front of the show floor, and we ended up having engineers 20 deep waiting to talk to our engineers about what they were trying to build. And I walked the rest of the show floor, and we were by far the busiest. Even though there were very large companies there, like Sun Microsystems and Oracle and um, IBM and Hewlett Packard, and all of the big players had a presence. But little WebLogic was the hottest ticket of the show, and that was sort of our coming out party where we knew we built something really special.
I read a book once by Andrew Grove called "Only the Paranoid Survive," and my takeaway from that book is you never really land at product market fit. You may get there, but you have to keep innovating. You have to keep thinking about what's next. Does that resonate with you? Do you look at product market fit as a one-time event, or do you feel like in the history of a company, you're constantly going through a constant, whether it's pivot or new products or evolutions, just constantly keeping your fingers on the pulse?
So for sure, you have to keep your fingers on the pulse. I've never really been part of a pivot. I've been an advisor to companies that have pivoted, but of the 5 startups I've been involved in, we've all largely pursued the initial goals that we set out to pursue, and I think we thought carefully about them. And so there is this event of initial product market fit where you realize you've got something, you're onto something, you're getting that confirmation back from the customers that your product is special. But there's no question, I mean, competition is very real, right? It's I love to say we should embrace it, right? Competition drives innovation, it drives customer value. Without competition, we won't move as fast, we won't um, price our products to perfection to deliver value to customers. And so it's really crucial to drive the machine. But if you're not paying attention, and you're not trying to stay ahead of your competitors, then you don't deserve customer business. And so if you want to win that repeat business, you've got to be very judicious in making sure your product remains the best choice for customers over the long term.
Scott, after WebLogic, you at BA Systems. So WebLogic, was it an acquisition by BA? Is that what happened there? Yeah. And then CTO at BA Systems. Tell me about your time there. You were there for 6 years. That when I speak to people in the industry who know you very well, they sometimes refer, oh yeah, Scott, BA Systems. Like it's like it's a particular moment maybe, um, along with Pure Storage. But BA Systems, tell me about that time.
So, we had sold the WebLogic business to BEA. We needed to scale quickly. And BEA had expertise in the application server space. They had a product called Tuxedo, and they had a big sales force. And we did not have the ability to scale fast enough. And so it made a lot of sense to put the two companies together. Um, you know, One of the challenges with acquisitions is, there's always different worldviews inside of these companies. And so, there were definitely an existing product suite at BEA that they were nervous about. WebLogic coming in and changing the way people looked at things. There were even discussions of us needing to put governors on WebLogic because it was running too fast and it might be predative on the other business. But the thing where WebLogic had going for it is growth. It was just growing, so exponentially quickly, like doing 3x, 4x year over year in terms of revenue. And so that kind of really steep growth curve made it an easy case to make that was where future investment should go. So I learned a lot, going through those debates, and I think that was ultimately why I was anointed CTO of the business, is because I helped make the case that we should bet on this future, faster growing market, even as we preserve the legacy market.
Just going back to that, so how, when you look at a start as an advisor, as an investor, and even when you look at companies like Augment and Pure Storage, how much of an indication of a successful company comes from how quickly you reach escape velocity in the beginning? Like, can you look at companies and say, "Do you know what, I can pretty much have, um, there's enough good sign to say, look, if a company gets to a certain stage in the first year or two, this is going to be a winner," or is it okay to see a company that might take maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years to then have that J curve?
I think in hindsight, things look like they were faster successes than they were in reality. Especially when you're trying to tackle really hard problems, it takes a long time. I mean, NVIDIA is the perfect poster child for this, right? Spending years and years building highly parallel processors for graphics, and only then, being in a phenomenal position to catch the crypto and then AI waves because of all that investment that they'd made for decades. You know, each of the things that I've been part of were really complex undertakings, that required very sophisticated system software. And in the case of Augment, also very sophisticated AI models that we post-train and, enhance. And so, there's years of work that goes into getting that right. Um, and, only then do you start seeing, the kind of market success. So, I would say it depends on what you're trying to tackle in terms of, how quickly you can get there. And you see companies making both mistakes. One, trying to rush a product to market that isn't ready, that doesn't really sufficiently fill a customer need. And so, they get unhappy customers. Unhappy customers are really expensive if you're a startup. So, it's much better to say no to a customer if you don't think you're ready to really deliver them a success. And you get a huge amount of credibility with them for doing that. They'll try to find other use cases where you can fit because you become a trusted advisor if you tell them no. On the other hand, you see these startups making the opposite mistake, like trying to engineer something perfect, not hitting the market aggressively once they have minimum viable product, something that can actually showcase their value and future potential, because you need those early customers to help, you know, shape your future product, as well as help, you understand the value you really deliver. So many times, customers help you learn what value you really deliver to them. You may have theories about that, but the actual engagement with those early customers um, changes the way you think about it. There's a great Harvard Business Press paper on this. It's short by Mark Leslie called "The Sales Learning Curve." It's been my Bible. I reread it at least at every new startup that I join, just to make sure it's fresh in my mind. Over how you have a small sales team to work with those early customers to make sure you've got that initial product market fit.
As far as the customers are concerned, how important are the design partners in the early days?
I think critical. You need thoughtful individuals that see the potential in the technology, that are smart enough to work around your rough edges. Right? There's always things that are going to break in this new tech, and so the smarter, more savvy customers can find workarounds for your gaps, and then they'll also highlight the things that are the real pain points versus the other pain points. I would say one of the key learnings, that I goes all the way back to that first startup, Transarc, um, is software has to be really easy to use for businesses as well as consumers to embrace it. We had a tolerance for complexity that came out of university, that we didn't really understand the real world in terms of how easy you have to make technology to adopt. Um, and I think vendors often lose sight of it. Even vendors that win, the early days of Oracle, it was actually quite an easy to use database, and Oracle would give you all the documentation and so on. Over the years, it became a very complicated piece of technology, and that comes with additional costs for the customer and makes them ripe for disruption. I think this is a huge part of the learnings of cloud. Is cloud became a last mile for open source, and in removing a lot of the complexity associated with adopting these largely unfinished products in terms of their ease of use, making them much easier to embrace via software as a service, as opposed to having to bring the technology in house and run it for yourself.
Scott, how many, when you're looking back at your career and the startups you've been involved in, how often does a design partner convert into a customer?
So at least the good design partners, it's near 100%. If you have a design partner that you ultimately turn out to not be a fit for, that you usually understand that pretty quickly. They're not making the investment to give you the concrete feedback, or you realize that what you have is not a fit for their use case. And if you recognize that, eh, communicate it early, right? Don't if you're not going to make that customer successful, it's not worth pouring your resource into trying to do it. You really have to keep the focus on the customers that you're confident you can make successful in a realistic timeline.
Scott, you've built startups. What about being a design partner yourself? Have you done that before?
Not directly myself. Certainly the teams that I've been part of and helped lead have used a lot of new technology. But I wasn't on the front line. I was maybe helping decide whether or not this was a good partner that we could trust and was going to step up and try to earn our business. But there were always people underneath that were doing the day-to-day work and then giving them the feedback about what they needed to do in order to win that business.
I want to now go into a big chunk of your career, a big success, Pure Storage, where it started, and seeing that journey all the way to the IPO event. So where did it start? When you joined Pure Storage, what was the size of the team? There probably wasn't a product, right? Tell me about Pure Storage.
Yeah, I think I was, the 16th hire into the team. It was mostly engineers that Sutter Hill had recruited. Mike Spicer, who was the lead investor, had put the team together and ran it for the first year before I joined. So there was a very strong initial technical team and two really very capable co-founders that match perfectly. One was a deep storage expert, John Colgrove, and then his co-founder John Hayes was didn't know storage, but was one of the best architects I've ever worked with, and would challenge sort of the legacy assumptions. So we ended up doing things like building in C++ and user space and using Linux rather than Solaris or other legacy storage solutions, and it allowed us to innovate at a much faster pace. And so that kind of yin and yang. Um, we did not have a product, but we had this insight that if we could do data reduction, deduplication, and compression, and we could accomplish them with sub-millisecond latency, that we would be able to launch an all-flash storage device that was cost competitive with mechanical disk. And that was a really powerful value proposition because it was 10x faster, 10x more space and power efficient, um, uh, 10x, at least 10x more reliable. And, it was more than, probably about 50x simpler to deploy and manage. And so you put all of those pieces together, and you had a really great elevator pitch. And people didn't believe it, but once you proved it to them, you go in and replace 2 or 3 Sub-Zero refrigerators of mechanical spinning disk with a little Sub-Zero, and it ran 10 times or more faster. Customers became convinced very quickly.
What were the biggest challenges during that time at Pure? What would you say the biggest challenges of building a company, right? It's surely, it has its successes, but it also has its failures.
So the hardest thing with every startup that I've been at has always been recruiting. Um, you know, uh, Culture matters a great deal for startups, but it's really mostly recruiting. In the early days, think of getting your culture right is 90% getting your hires right in terms of hiring people with that are supremely gifted at what they do and that don't have a tolerance for politics, that want to build something um, together as a team. And so when you can find and array that level of talent and don't dilute that talent, ideally continue to hire people that are as good or better than the average people you already have in the business. Then you can get these compounding returns of being able to build something great. So, I would say I've had most of my success that I've gotten to enjoy has been a byproduct of me lowering the average IQ when I walk in the door, because we are able to attract such unbelievably gifted engineers as well as business people, marketing and sales leaders, to help in these efforts. So most of my energy, goes into thinking about strategy and direction, how we're going to disrupt in the market, how we're going to convey our value proposition and recruiting. That's so much of the job for the first several years.
How much of your time today is recruiting?
I would say it's order a third. A third of my typical day is spent um, interviewing, talking to candidates, doing back channels on candidates, to understand their approach to work in other companies. There's also getting a chance to tell our story. So I do spend a lot of time talking to customers and partners. Although now that we have self service up, the product is doing ever more talking for itself. Engineers don't really want to talk to somebody like me or a salesperson. They're much more excited to try a product out and see how well it works, and if it does indeed fulfill the value that they're hoping from it. So we try to tell the story and then let the product go and conquer.
But why is it that, and I hear this every single time I speak to a founder, that hiring talent is the most difficult part of building a business. Why is that so difficult? If you've got a great product, you've got great leadership, strong investors, why does it make it difficult?
Startups really need to find the very best, most capable individuals, in these particular areas, because growth is really hard. Um, and working with a clean slate, that one of the benefits of startups is you don't have all of the legacy constraints that a typical business is encumbered by, because you've got hundreds or thousands of customers that you have to keep happy on top of an existing solution. So it becomes mature businesses, it's a very difficult optimization problem because you're trying to move, maybe this part of the product here and this part there. Um, but you can't make big changes. In a startup, when you're reimagining from whole cloth, you have so much more in the ways of degrees, so many more degrees of freedom that you need to think really carefully about what you want to build, and that's where top 1% talent, they're not 20 or 30% more productive. It's more like a 20x more productive in shaping something from scratch, and it's not for everybody, right? Not everybody needs to go work at a startup. Yeah, one of the things I say, if you don't like politics, don't go work at a big company. But if you don't like work, don't go work at a startup, right? Because the level of effort required to build a business from scratch is really hot. And I have teenage kids, and when they hit their growth spurts, they sleep and eat a lot because it takes a lot of energy to grow and build a business from scratch. And so you need those people that are supremely gifted and prepared to be all in and not going to play politics in a way that would slow the rest of the company down.
Politics. There are, it's great to have amazing talent in a team. Let's say you have 10 people, they're incredible. Have you had instances in the past, and we don't have to pick a particular company, where you've got a solid team, but all it took is one bad egg to come in and just disrupt the culture? Have you seen that happen before? Maybe not your one of your startups, but have you seen it throughout your career?
So I've definitely seen hires, including ones at my startups, play political games, and you have to stop that. You give them coaching aggressively, and if they don't respond to the coaching, I mean, every company that's growing fast is going to make hiring mistakes, and people that don't mesh in the culture, or that they're not prepared to make the kind of investment necessary for success. So you need to aggressively move those people out of the business, and you try to do it as humanely as possible. Give them options to decide they're no longer want to stay at the business, but you've got to guard that culture and productivity very carefully. One of the areas where you often to get into trouble is middle managers. Usually the senior leadership team are aligned because they're all incented to build the overall business because they each have a functional area. But when you bring in middle managers in between those leaders and the rank and file, they can have a political orientation, especially if they come out of big companies where they're incented to grow their teams potentially at the expense of other managers. And so you've really got to be careful about those middle management hires. Politics often finds a way to, intrude. I think the more your business scales, it's eventually you're going to lose some of that battle over time. But you want to fight the good fight for as long as possible to keep politics out. And the best way is to keep everybody focused on external lenses, right? How do we serve our customers better? How do we do better for our partners? How do we compete better to win more against the competitors that are arrayed to us, deliver more value against us, and deliver more value to those customers? If you can keep everybody focused on the external view of the company rather than so you're trying to grow the pie rather than thinking about how to carve up the pie, you'll have a lot more success.
How quickly does it take for you to notice a bad hire? How long is it, within the first month, or especially if they're causing politics in the org?
The key thing for me is I want to have a lot of conversations across the organization. There's remember somebody saying, there are few of a view of corporations as monkeys in a tree. When you look down the tree, you see smiling monkey faces, but when you look up the tree, the view's quite a bit different. And given I'm effectively at the top of the tree, it's really important for me to know what the people at the bottom of the tree are seeing. And so I cultivate. I do a lot of one-on-ones with individual contributors that I have trust relationships with to get their view of how things are going. I would say another thing that really helps is transparency. In some organizations, CEOs will communicate with the team through their leaders, right? So they say something in a staff meeting, and then each of those managers turns around and communicates it in their staff meeting or in one-on-ones, and that sort of trickle down approach um, ultimately allows information to become power. If you get access to the information, you're empowered more than somebody who doesn't get access. You're much better off broadcasting information about the business. So one of the things we do and done ever since I've been a CEO is we take our board decks and go through them with the whole company and talk about the discussion that took place, what we see, what we're happy with, what we're worried about. And that arms the entire company with the ability to think about the problems that, the leadership team is thinking about, so everybody can contribute to making the company better. And then information is never used as a political weapon, where one person is empowered and others aren't. Too many leaders will treat their startups as fragile, not able to handle, bad news along with the good news. I've always found it much better to communicate everything. People are adults. Let's talk about what's going well and let's talk about what we need to work on so everyone can help us get better.
That is exactly what I've heard when I speak to people who work at Pure Storage, the culture you built. And I know you're not going to take credit for it, but when people talk to me about Pure Storage, they have nothing but great things to say. When you think of culture, especially now you are part of building an important culture at Augment, how do you think about culture in a not just engineering, but across the entire organization?
So I- I've often used the analogy of stone soup for culture. I may have brought the pot and filled it up with water, but the whole point of startups is you're assembling a culture out of all of those early hires are contributing and adding things to the culture. And ideally, you keep the good stuff and you try to discard some of the baggage that you don't want the culture to have. And that's why those early hires are so important. Think about early hires as not just delivering value, but you want them to be exemplars of the culture that you're aspiring to build. So, if you can hire great non-political talent early on, it makes it a lot easier to build a culture where everyone's aligned and pulling together. We write it down. We talk about how we want to work together. We talk about the values of trust and transparency in terms of bringing the business together. We talk about hard work and collaboration. I think it was Reagan that said, "There's no limit to what you can accomplish as long as you don't care who gets the credit." If you build a culture where everybody's passing credit to others, it turns out it's self perpetuating. Um, and I think that's absolutely what happened at Pure. I was so aggressive at offering credit to all those I saw deserving of it that I get more credit back than I deserve because I'm happy to pass it along. But it was so many really talented people that came together and were aligned in wanting to build something great where people looked after each other and weren't were after overall success. I remember one early hire, great cultural fit, was struggling to believe it was real, right? Because he'd, been working in big companies that were very political, and he'd been stabbed in the back so many times. And I said, "Why can't you believe it?" And he goes, "Because I'm coming from the equivalent of a broken home, right? Where, people didn't take care of me and didn't look after my career and my success the way I feel like it happens at Pure." But doing that frees everybody up. If everybody in the company can look up the leadership chain and feel like somebody's there cares about my career, cares about being treated fairly, it frees you up to accomplish so much more. I tell most of the new recruits to Augment, I never ask for a raise, I never ask for a promotion, I never ask for more stock in my career because uh, I always either had, a boss or a management chain that I was convinced would do the right thing. When I was deserving of additional reward, they would give it to me and additional responsibility. They would give me that chance, or I quit because I'm not going to work for somebody that I don't trust, and I wouldn't expect anyone else to work for somebody they don't trust. And so we really want to cultivate that deep trust across the team.
In that, how do you feel about counter offers?
I hate the whole idea of a counteroffer. You know, from my perspective, that I want people to be paid what they're worth to the business. And if somebody comes in and is worth dramatically more to some other business and they're more excited about that, then by all means, they should go. Because that's what they want to do, and if somebody else views them as more valuable. But the whole idea of offering a counteroffer um, suggests that you were paying them less than you think they were worth because you thought you could get away with it until they actually try to hold you accountable. Um, I think there have been cases where you make a mistake and you realize that somebody is, there. There's at least one case I remember where we had a promotion in the works for somebody and they came in with a counter offer, and then we still delivered the promotion and said, "Look, you should do what you want to do, but know this was in the works." But the idea that you would offer somebody a promotion or a raise just because they went and got an offer somewhere else, that violates trust for everyone in the organization, because it says the only way to be treated fairly is to go out and hold the company for ransom.
It does, and it's something that I tend to look out for a lot when I'm speaking to candidates is, have they ever accepted one? Have they been in a situation where they thought about accepting one? Especially when you're speaking to candidates who've been at a company for a considerable amount of time, 5 years to 10 years. One of the key questions we like to ask is, in the last 5 years, have you interviewed? And sometimes we do get the response being, yes, I interview once a year. But why do you do that? And sometimes it is, I'm going out to get some offers and coming back to get a counter offer, and the intention is there. That's an immediate alarm bell, right? I'm also just like you. I think it's a it's bad. It's not good for business. And the question is always, where is this counter offer coming from? If it's not like the case study you just gave about the promotion, is it coming from someone else's potential budget? Where's the money coming from? Where's the promotion coming from?
And you don't necessarily fault the candidate for just seeing what, the market for their talent is. I mean, that's why we live in a free country where people are often free. Um, the fault lies in making the counteroffer, right? Ideally, every manager should be looking after their team and feel like their team is getting fairly rewarded relative to their contributions, or you should proactively true it up. I love going to, team members and telling them, you know what, you're doing great. We've given you extra equity or giving you a raise because, you're um, delivering above and beyond even our high expectations. And so you've earned it. And doing that when nobody is expecting it is so, profoundly powerful for the team member, to receive that. Whereas, when if you accept a counteroffer, at some level, you've already broken trust, right? You don't trust this team to do the right thing for you, so you had to go out and get the alternative. I think interviewing is fine, and taking an offer and leaving is fine. But if you accept the counteroffer, you're effectively saying, "Okay, I'm going to work for somebody that I don't really trust to do the right thing for me, and I'm going to have to continue to do this same strategy to be treated fairly." Why? Life's too short. Don't work for somebody you don't trust.
That's true. That is true. Um, I read somewhere that when you speak to candidates at the closing stage, what is it you say? Do you want to spend the next 5 years of your life turning 15-year-old legacy software into 20-year-old legacy software?
The journey of so many of these large code bases is challenging, and it's not a particularly fun thing to have to do. And I mentioned that kind of incremental optimizations are what you're stuck with when you've got a really large legacy code base. I do think AI is making it a lot better to be able to manage that, but it's still a very constraining activity. And so if you belong in that upper echelon of engineering talent, or you want to prove yourself to belong in that upper echelon, there's nothing like a startup that gives you a chance to move broadly across a new code base, to help shape it from scratch, to build something that is much closer to architectural perfection than something that was designed 10, 15 years ago tends to be. But it also requires a lot more work. One of the things I'll tell people, like, if you're tired, by all means take a job at a big company. And if you're top talent, you may be able to get away with working 2-3 hours a day, and still get top grades inside those companies, because they're not expecting the kind of contribution that's required at a startup. But if you want to push yourself and see what you're capable of, and build your career toward being a founder someday, then for sure work at a startup. Startups are so much better, in the sense that you see much more of the surface area of the product. You get to interact with customers. You can see and touch sales. In the case of Augment, we give you full visibility. You can meet investors. You see all different aspects of the business as well as the technology. And so you're in a much better position to see what the role of a founder would look like. And you'll never get that from a big company. It's just, if you want to be an entrepreneur, go to an earlier stage company. It is far and away, um, will hone your skills, and frankly, it's a much more fun than working at a large company ever could be.
Is that like a natural progression of large companies? Every startup eventually becomes a large company. Do they at that point do they just lose the innovation?
So there are large companies that manage to continue to innovate. I look at Google, I look at Apple, I look at Tesla, Nvidia. I mean, these companies are large, but they do indeed continue to innovate. Although, I would say that innovation isn't necessarily coming from the majority of the company. I often joke that all software aspires to be legacy, right? That's the best outcome for software, is that it becomes legacy. The other outcome is obsolescence. And so for startups, you either grow into a big company, you get acquired into a big company, or you die. And so I think every startup ought to aspire to be its own big company, and eventually to invite politics in, and the slowing of innovation. You can still innovate, but you can do it in pockets, but then you have these existing big businesses you have to protect. Um, but that's kind of the best outcome. But that's also not my fun, where I have fun, which is why, when companies get to a particular scale, um, I find that there are people much better suited to that stage of the business than myself, and why I always go back and start over from scratch.
That's a great segue to my next question around pure storage. When you decided to make the move and depart after the company went public, what was the I guess reasoning behind that?
So Pure had gotten to be, close to $1 billion in revenue, and it was 2,000 employees. We'd had a very successful IPO, which had been a dream for me, was to IPO a business. I'd always wanted to do it. Uh, One of the things about an IPO is you no longer decide who your investors are. As a private company, you have the luxury of choosing who you want to invest in your business. A public company, of course, the market, decides who values your equity the highest. They become your investors. We had great investors, and they were asking questions, though, that I didn't have good answers to. Like, when is the right time to, reorganize into business units away from the functional organization that you are currently? You know, I, that question started getting asked, and I realized I didn't have a good answer. I'd been able to answer these questions throughout Pure's trajectory, because I'd done so many of the stages before. I realized we were out of my, comfort zone, out of my experience. And one of my mentors, Frank Slootman, had stepped down from ServiceNow. He said something I always loved, that because I was worried, like, why, you're on a tear, everything's going great. Why do you want to step down? And he said, um, I'm Patton, and there comes a time that you want an Eisenhower, right? He felt like he was no longer the right leader for the stage that ServiceNow was entering. And, I thought to myself, well, what am I doing? I'm not even Patton. So why am I in charge of this now large business? Wouldn't it benefit from somebody with a lot more experience? And we were able to recruit Charlie Giancarlo. He had run a 30,000 person organization at Cisco, been a CTO, driven, strategy. It just had so much more insight into what an organization at that scale would require going forward, that I thought Pure was in better hands. It was tough, right? Because we had to do this recruiting without being transparent with the team, because you're a public company, and inside of a public company, if the CEO is passing the baton, everyone assumes there's bad news, right? Either the current quarter is going badly or the next quarter is going badly. So we timed the transition so we could announce beat and raise earnings right as the CEO transition happened at the same time, which ended up being the most seamless transition, but it was not easy to pull off.
That's pretty cool. I like that. It's definitely well timed. How has that journey been ever since leaving Pure before you joined Augment?
Uh, so Charlie's done a remarkable job with the business. They're passed over 3 billion in revenue in this most recent year. Earnings just reported. And the business has continued to scale and do well. I still serve on the board, which is fun. It's something, a promise I made to the team, that as long as the board wanted me, I would be honored to stay and serve. But it's not like they need me particularly. I took some time off. I thought I was probably done as an entrepreneur, but this again, the emergence of large language models, my own history in machine learning, having done a dissertation on it, and then having so keenly felt the pain of software engineering at scale, I had this major fear of missing out on all the fun in applying AI to fix software. I believe software is broken. I believe, if we can deliver high quality, easy to use software for all the different use cases that, people imagine, that we will, vastly improve our economy and a lot of humanity. So that's what we're off to try to do.
Where were you when Augment came up in a conversation? How did that come up about?
The founding team, there were one of the chief architects at Pure who I'd worked with was the lead founder at Augment. We recruited a co-founder from Google with really deep expertise in machine learning. We had a little reading group where we were going through papers, and I was advising the company for fun, but mostly because I wanted to learn and kind of catch up on all of the work that had happened in machine learning while I'd been off doing entrepreneurship and startups. And through the course of that, we talked about where we saw the sweet spot in the market, and what we compared notes on how we should grow and scale. And I got ever more vested in the business, and they got more vested in me. I think both of those needed to happen, but they were excited to have me join, and I was certainly very gratified to get the chance to work with such a talented team.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Scott, I have really enjoyed recording this episode with you, especially the first one. I'd like to finish off with a final question. Want to create a bit of a tradition with this show, and the question is, um, as far as reading is concerned, reading books, is there a book that you would recommend? Maybe one, maybe two, but books that, when you look at your incredibly successful career that you've had and where you are today, a book that truly has resonated with you.
For entrepreneurship, the two that I would cite are Frank Slootman's "Amp It Up," where he covers experience at ServiceNow, as well as his follow-on job at Snowflake. He's uh, an operator extraordinaire. I'm so grateful to have had him helping me as a first-time CEO know the ropes and how to attack and how to do things. He's just amazingly insightful. One of my favorite, I've heard his story and had his insights for years, but when I read Amp It Up, one of the things he said that really I took to heart is the idea that when something isn't going the way you expect, don't just flip strategies quickly, but deeply diagnose what's going on. he uses the analogy of a doctor. Like, a doctor doesn't just hear you say your new symptoms and just write you a new prescription and, try a new strategy and see if that works. Generally, the doctor tries to gather as much data as they can, at least the good doctors do, to figure out what really ails you, and in order to come up with a winning strategy in this particular situation. So do the hard thinking, is the takeaway from that. And there's a lot of other great insights. The other book I would recommend is Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I think that's another excellent book for entrepreneurs. I do lots of reading. I would say too, for anyone looking to come up to speed in machine learning, there's a extraordinary wealth of information out there. I think I get more out of the educational YouTube videos than I did out of the books that I was reading on the topic. But you can become expert quickly. I mean, it's really a fun and exciting space to be playing in.
Are you an avid reader? Do you read pretty much always have a book?
Always have books going. Always have podcasts going. I would say, it's variable how much reading time I get per day. When I wasn't working, I was getting 2-3 hours. But now that, I'm back looking after a startup, maybe I'm lucky with 15-20 minutes.
And as far as running a business, right? You're a CEO of an incredibly successful startup. How do you keep that going, right? From a personal perspective, like what do you do to switch off, to sort of unwind and relax? What does Scott Deetson do to outside of Augment?
My son is a senior in high school, and last week he had his last ski week before he goes off to college. So he and I and his younger sister headed out and did a 5 days of skiing in the trees,
Nice.
and we had a wonderful time. I find children definitely they want your full attention when they're giving you theirs, and so it's certainly very rewarding time. I try to stay fit too, and so I certainly attempt to make time for exercise every day. I think it keeps you mentally sharp as well as, physically capable. So I will try to turn off my brain, for fitness or music. So
Nice.
music is very much part of my daily routine. Try to catch live music whenever I can.
That's awesome. What kind of music do you like?
It's all over the map, but mostly a mix of, alternative and jazz. I would say I spend the majority of my time. I do like classical too. But a lot of edgy, quirkier artists.
Awesome. Scott, it was an absolute pleasure. It's the first ever episode, and to have you on it is an honor.
For us, thank you so much for having me, for working with us at Augment. Thrilled to be part of your journey, and thank you for making ours a better one.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Scott.
All right. All the best.
This podcast was brought to you by Serrana Labs and powered by Harrison Clark. At Harrison Clark, we're at the heart of Silicon Valley's evolution and at the intersection of search and venture, funding the companies shaping the future and connecting them to the most elite cloud, data, and AI talent. To learn more, visit harrisonclark.com. If today's episode challenged your thinking, then share it with someone who's driving innovation. For even more insights on achieving product market fit, subscribe to our newsletter, The PMF Playbook, where we break down the journey from zero to product market fit. Visit thepmfplaybook.com. For more episodes, follow us on social media or visit InsideTheSiliconMind.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind. See you soon.